Hey Kentucky, this is Matt Jones here with Chip Cosby outside the Yum Center in Louisville. It is our top 10 stories of 2017. We decided to go outside. It's cold as it can be, and we're going to count down the 10 biggest stories here on Hey Kentucky. That's tonight. We're up next. Welcome everybody to Hey Kentucky, sponsored by Wendy's and Sullivan University. Matt Jones, Chip Cosby. For reasons I don't really know, we decided to be outside on the coldest day of the year. Chip, how are you?
Good, on the frozen tundra of the KFC Yum Center.
That's right. We are right in front of the Yum Center here in Louisville, where I did my radio show today, and we're giving a special edition. This is the top 10 stories of 2017 on Hey Kentucky. Ready to get going?
Let's go.
Let's go to number 10. The 10th biggest story this season on Hey Kentucky was David Dow. You may remember him. He was the passenger on the United Airlines flight who was from Bowling Green, who was dragged out of his seat when he refused to leave after being switched to another flight. Of course, the video went everywhere, went viral. People were outraged at how Mr. Dow was treated, especially since he was a doctor. Then over time, Dow threatened a lawsuit. They ended up amicably settling with United Airlines, and the two security guards that dragged him off were ultimately fired. Now, this story got a ton of attention, Chip, in part because people were just outraged that something like this would happen on an airplane.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been on a crowded airplane and been through that experience. But, you know, to me, it just kind of shows where we're at. So much anger in the country right now. I mean, you've got airline officers, security officers, not police officers, dragging a guy out, bloodied everywhere. I mean, those images I thought that was just a bad thing.
As the story continued to come out, we learned that, maybe he was asked politely and said no, but I still side with the good doctor on this one. There had to be a better method. And I also have to say, Chip, I don't like the fact that they can sell you a ticket and then kick you off of it because they sold too many.
Yeah, I mean, why? I don't understand how they felt like they could make him get off that plane. I still haven't understood the rationale of why they felt they could make this gentleman get off the plane.
And I think that's why they ultimately ended up settling with him. I thought the dude would get the most money imaginable. Maybe he did.
Yeah.
We don't know, but it could have been worse for United even than it was. Now, number 9 is here in Lexington. Well, they're in Lexington. We're in Louisville. Jim Gray announced a decision to take down 2 Confederate statues honoring John Hunt Morgan and John Breckinridge. They were downtown, one of which was in the pavilion and one of which next to Cheapside. He decided to take both of them down, and the question was, how do you do it? After the violence in Charlottesville, a decision was made to move them to the Lexington Cemetery, where they could stay and be visited, but not be honored in downtown. Now, this is an issue that's gone all over this country. I thought, actually, the way Mayor Gray ended up handling it, where he took them down, didn't, however, take them away to the dustbins of history, put them in the cemetery, but did it in the middle of the night where there wouldn't be violence, ended up being a good one.
Yeah, and I think with the Charlottesville situation, it brought to light, with a lot of people, this is still a sore spot. I mean, it's a part of history that many African Americans prefer not to look back on. So I thought it was a healthy compromise. You don't take away that part of history entirely. You just move it and put it into a public place somewhere where people who still want to see it can see it.
But you're not just honoring it. I think that was part of it. A lot of people don't realize most of these statues went up during Jim Crow. They didn't even go up during the Confederacy, and actually, of course, Kentucky wasn't even part of the Confederacy at all. But the decision to move it in the middle of the night, I think Mayor Gray deserves a lot of credit. It kept Charlottesville from happening here.
Exactly. I mean, if you would have had that in the middle of the day in downtown Lexington, no telling what could have happened.
And a lot of people forget that in Charlottesville, that started due to a statue being taken down, and the timing was Lexington was next. Right. If you remember, there were some rumors that same group was going to come to Lexington. I think Gray's decision to put it off actually made sense, and it's our number 9 story of the year. Now, number 8 story went all year long. A lot of us were surprised when Donald Trump was elected president, but maybe nobody more so than Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell. The Republican leader probably thought things would be easy with Trump, but they often weren't. The two leaders they went at each other a lot over a bunch of issues, including legislation. McConnell was unable to get a repeal of Obamacare through the Senate, which Trump then mocked him on Twitter often. Throughout the year, they bickered about candidates, with McConnell supporting a different candidate in the Alabama Senate election than Donald Trump. But the year ended with tax reform being passed and some positive signs between the two leaders. Mitch McConnell, in the end, one of the most unpopular politicians in America. Trump isn't that popular, but what do you think of their fight all year long?
Well, I'll tell you, it just really, to me, it was a sign of the Republican Party. I mean, you've got two, arguably the two most prominent members going at each other's throats. I guess now they're kind of starting to mend fences a little bit, but I thought their relationship during the course of the year was just kind of a microcosm of the party in general.
I think that fence mending is also temporary. I mean, I think you're exactly right, Chip. I think you hit it. These two guys represent the two sides of the Republican Party.
Right.
You have Mitch McConnell, the business interest side. That's the person who's always kind of been a traditional Republican, standing up for sort of business interest and keeping the working class down, in my opinion. And then here comes Trump, who's more of a social conservative, a conservative about immigration and things like that. Not always pro-business. Sometimes. And I think the two of them really, their fights, like you said, mirrored the fights in the party as a whole.
Absolutely. And I think they've got to try to find a way to at least somewhat get on the same page.
It'll be worse in 2018 because there are elections coming up,
right.
And I'm not sure how well the Republicans are going to do. Now, number 7 is one that painfully hurts me, which is the Kentucky loss this year to Florida at home. It was the biggest football game of the year, arguably one of the biggest games in the last 5 years. Kentucky sought to break a 31-year losing streak at home to Florida. The hype for the game was unprecedented. People everywhere in Lexington. Game was sold out, and it looked like the Cats were going to win. They got up 13, only to allow Florida to score 14 points in the fourth quarter, and 2 of their touchdowns when a Kentucky player did not even cover a Florida receiver. This loss, I think, still, Chip, haunts the fan base to this day.
Absolutely. I mean, because you win that game. I mean, I think that loss just kind of shaped the rest of the season. They were never the same. I don't know if they were ever a great team, but they weren't the same team after that loss. And in a year where you've got Florida down, you got Tennessee down, this was a perfect opportunity. If they were ever going to win 9 or 10 games,
this was the
year to do it.
And the other thing is, it's because it's Florida.
Yeah,
I mean, 31 straight years. And I agree with you. I mean, this Kentucky team won 7 games. Normally fans would be happy, but they're not. And I think it's because of this Florida game. And Chip, I do think a big part of it was not covering the receiver on those 2 plays.
Twice. Yeah, that's. I mean, I think it's the way they lost some of these games. I mean, you look at Florida. I mean, they laid an egg against Louisville and had all these personal fights. It's not so much the losses as much as the way they lost.
And over the years, Florida, we've always been able to explain losses to Florida with, well, they got better players. But this year, I think most fans watched that game and said, we're better, and yet we lost. And I think that's why Stoops took a lot of the blame for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, 7-5 is typically acceptable, but I think this year, I mean, people are disappointed, no doubt.
And that loss, for the Kentucky fan base, that might be the number 1 story of the year, but it's number 7 here on Hey Kentucky. We go now to the number 6 story of 2017, and it's a young, well, not so young, lawyer from Eastern Kentucky, Eric C. Conn. He started the year after being convicted of various forms of fraud to his Social Security lawyer work. He then escaped and ended up in Honduras, where he was running for the FBI. There was a 4-month trail of when will they find Eric C. Conn, and then they finally did in a Pizza Hut in Honduras, where he was captured, and he now faces life in prison. I found this story fascinating, Chip, and part of the reason was, if you're from Eastern Kentucky, you know who Eric C. Conn was. He was on billboards forever. But then running away from the FBI for so long, that was fairly impressive, then only to get caught in a Pizza Hut.
Yeah, Pizza Hut in Honduras, of all places. I mean, this is a lifetime movie waiting to happen. As a matter of fact, I think we start your acting career playing Eric C. Conn.
It'll be a movie. You know it'll be a movie.
Absolutely.
Eric C. Conn is such a bizarre figure. I mean, he put out music videos. He hired the dead giveaway Charles Ramsey guy to do a commercial. But I do think there was part of Eastern Kentucky, Chip, rooting for him when he ran off, don't you think?
Especially as it got further and further along, I think it became more fascinating to the public, no doubt.
And then to get caught in Honduras in a Pizza Hut. I mean, that made it even better. Now, here's my question for you. Considering what he did and considering that he ran away, how long should he spend his life in jail? All of it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you consider I don't know. That's a tough one.
It's tough.
You're the lawyer.
I think he's going to be at least 15 or 20 years. Yeah. I don't know if it'll be life.
I think he'll be in. I think
he'll be in for a long time. Now, number 5 is probably my favorite story of the year. And that was the bizarre fight in Bowling Green between Rand Paul and a local doctor, Rene Boucher. Rand Paul, the senator, was mowing the yard outside of his house when all of a sudden he was attacked blindsided by his next door neighbor for reasons that we still do not know. The tackle actually hurt Senator Paul a lot. He ended up going to the hospital. It took him a long time to recover. He had broken ribs and internal injuries. The feds have decided not to charge Boucher with a federal crime, although he will be charged with a state crime of assault of his neighbor. I still am fascinated by this story. Chip, we still don't know what they were fighting about. I love it.
How do we not know what happened? I mean, how long has this been going on for a while?
Months.
We still do not know. I mean, how do we not? I mean, I wish, and I think I said this earlier in the show, I wish some video would surface of this.
I do too.
Obviously, there's none out there. We probably would have seen it. But Rene Boucher, I mean, he sounds like a WWE wrestler or something.
There's so much about this. Why were they fighting? Like there's been talk that it's about like a compost pile. there's people thought it was politics, but then everybody said it wasn't. Here's the thing: when on my radio show, this was literally the topic that when we brought it up, I got the most attention on.
Right.
Everyone wanted to know about this, Chip. I think it's just the homeowner aspect of this dispute, and it involving a U.S. senator is fascinating.
And did Rene jump him from behind like everybody said, or did he just square up with Rand and whoop his butt? I mean,
and then Paul wanted to say
he jumped me from behind, man. No, it's no fair.
There are more conspiracy theories about this, and people in Bowling Green, every time I go to Bowling Green, that's all people are talking about. What happened between Boucher and Rand Paul? It might still be a story in 2018 as we try to find out what it was.
We may never find out what actually happened.
Number 4 story was Kentucky's run in the NCAA tournament last year. By the end of the season, Kentucky was playing in basketball as well as anybody in the country. They had the nation's longest winning streak going into the NCAA tournament, but unfortunately were given a 2 seed in the South, which led them to have to play in the same bracket as North Carolina. North Carolina was probably the best team in the country. The game was an epic run in Memphis. After Kentucky had beaten Lonzo Ball and UCLA in the game before, Luke May hit a shot at the buzzer, and the Cats went down. It was a great game. It was a great run. I think by the end of the year, Chip, Kentucky was the second best team. They just happened to play the best team.
Yeah, I mean, and if you look at it, I mean, that's about as good of a non-Final Four year as you can hope for. They won 32 games, and most of their losses were close losses to good teams. I mean, I think this Kentucky team will be remembered, even though they didn't make the Final Four. To win 32 games and to come that close to beating what was ultimately the best team in the country, good year for Cal.
And people forget about how good the Sweet 16 game was, where they annihilated Lonzo Ball and UCLA. There was a ton of hype for that going into it, and Kentucky just ran over. The North Carolina game was a good one. The Cats had a chance to win, had a big lead in the second half, 8 or 9 points, just gave it away, and then the Luke May shot hurts.
Yeah, and then because Monk hit an incredible shot that would have gone down in lore. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. You just tip your hat.
One of the things people forget is the game Isaac Humphries had in that game. Had they won, it would have been the legend of Isaac Humphries game because of how well he played. But I'm with you. Overall, Chip, I think you look at that as a good year. It was a team, I think it was probably Cal's, I've said his 4th best team after the Wall team, the Davis team, and the 38-1 team.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, they were great, and all those dudes, I think, will end up having success at the next level. Well, let's go to number 3, and it's a story that has a local component, but maybe was the biggest story of the year nationally, which was the movement, the MeToo movement that was started in part by Kentuckian Ashley Judd. She came forward along with a host of other women to detail the sexual harassment and assault by movie producer Harvey Weinstein. That story in the New York Times then started a movement with a ton of famous male personalities, all of whom were accused or proven of assault and harassment, and it led to the resignations of folks such as Al Franken, Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, a couple of congressmen, and people in all walks of life, including actors like Kevin Spacey. And Ashley Judd, who was a guest on this show, Chip, really was a big part of the start of this. That story about Harvey Weinstein really changed culture in a way you don't see a lot.
And at the time, a lot of people kind of turned a blind eye to it, but as more and more people as more issues started coming out nationally, you saw the impact of what she was able to do.
Ashley Judd is the Kentucky aspect to this story, and she's an interesting person because there was a time that she maybe was one of the most beloved Kentuckians. Huge UK fan. Every time there was a game, she'd be on television. Then her outspoken political thoughts, especially against President Trump, led to, I think, a lot of the state completely turning her off and being very angry with her. We saw that when we had her on here. but I don't think you can underestimate the impact of her coming forward. She was the famous face that really helped start this movement.
And that's what happens with any movement. You need somebody with some clout to take the step up and take the lead, and she was able to do that, and you saw what happened after. I think it gave more women the courage to stand up and tell the truth about what's been going on.
She and Rose McGowan were the names, and the movement needed a name, and they were named Time Magazine People of the Year for good reason.
Absolutely.
I think as well. The number 2 story has to be one of the most talked about political stories in years in Kentucky, which was the pension crisis and the attempts to fix it. We did a ton of stories here on Hey Kentucky about it as the state's teachers, public workers, police officers try to see what will happen to their pensions. Matt Bevin came up with a plan that would have decimated the pensions as part of a study, and it was so thoroughly rejected by the population that the state legislature never even called a session to attempt to enact it. Over the years, the actual plan then got loosened a little bit and lessened, but as of yet, nothing has happened, and this very well, Chip, might be the biggest story of 2018, as in January, the legislature has to come in session, and we'll see what they do.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at education, Kentucky, we're already near the bottom. I mean, if you do anything that discourages some of our better young professionals to go into the education industry, we're going to fall further behind. So there's no question, this is a huge issue, and it's something that needs to be resolved. I didn't like Bevin's idea. I'm from a family of teachers. They've got to get something done about this.
I want to say this. I'm proud of the state in terms of how this went. I don't think I've seen a political issue in recent years that more galvanized people at the grassroots, teachers, at local meetings across the state. You know, I did a couple of videos where I talked about the pension issue, and they were watched over 500,000 times. Hey Kentucky videos. They were by far the most successful things we ever did on this, and it was because people saw an issue and cared about it, and they made a difference. Without that, I think Bevin's plan would have passed, so a lot of great work by people in this state. It's time for number 1, Chip, and it shouldn't be a surprise. Standing outside the Yum Center, the number 1 story was the decimation of the University of Louisville via scandal. Of course, it started a couple years back with the Katina Powell stripper scandal, which led to more stories about UofL athletics. Then came the downfall of the Yum Center, but it all culminated in September when the FBI released news that they were investigating college basketball, and it was determined that the University of Louisville had paid $100,000 to Brian Bowen's father to get him to come to Louisville. The next thing that happened was surprising. Tom Jurich and Rick Pitino fired. UofL athletics completely transformed, and now they await their punishment from the NCAA. Did you ever think that by the end of 2017, Pitino and Jurich would be gone?
No way, no way. And I tell you what, I mean, you talk about all the scandals, but, you know, I grew up here. I'm a grad student at UofL. The thing that really has, you know, really surprised me, I guess it shouldn't be a surprise, the fan base is so fractured. I mean, you've got your one segment that is pro Pitino, pro Jurich, and then you've got your one side that's like, hey, we need to clean things up. I mean, it's just really, I think, not only from the scandal, but just a lot of the PR.
All of it, yeah.
I mean, it's going to take a long time.
The depth of this scandal is unbelievable. I mean, it was all over the university. It was in the president's office. It was in the AD's office. It was at the Yum Center. It was with the basketball program. And they needed a fresh start. And I give the new president a lot of credit, the interim Postal, the new athletic director, Tyra. They basically said, turning the page, and that's hard. A lot of fans are upset about that, but it had to be done because this university had become a laughingstock of scandal in recent years.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it took a lot of guts to stand up to Tom Jurich. I give Postal credit. I mean, I don't know if he'll get he may be a sacrificial lamb.
But he did what was right.
He did what was needed to do.
I agree, and that was the number 1 story of 2017. Now, we thank you folks for watching. Friday night, 2 UK games on Friday, UK Louisville basketball and the UK Music City Bowl against Northwestern. We are going to have a special wrap-up show, 7:30 to 9. All of the folks from Hey Kentucky, the sports department at LEX, we will be in Nashville wrapping it up at 7:30 to 9, watch the Music City Bowl, and then turn over to LEX. Thank you folks very much for watching. Those were your top 10 stories. We hope to make great stories in 2018 as well. This has been Hey Kentucky, live on a frigid day. Well, not live, sort of live, here in Louisville.